Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Discover the Intelligent Solution to Email Management. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. And it's my pleasure now to introduce you to today's speakers, David Lavenda, Harmony Chief Product Officer, and Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. David is a high-tech veteran, having served as an executive in enterprise software, mobile, security, and networking companies. In the academic realm, David's research explored the impact of email on information overload in organizations. David is an international scholar for the Society for the History of Technology and a founding member of the Humanizing the Digital Workplace Consortium. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him almost 20 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits and productivity that collaborative platforms enable. David, please get us started.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, good day, everybody. So we're all aware of the lament that everybody's been talking about, that email is dead. People are moving to other tools like Teams and Skype, Yammer in the Microsoft space, but lots of other things like Slack, and some of the chat tools like WhatsApp, Telegram, and of course, even in the enterprise, we've got lots of things related to project management that also have communications modalities. But we all know that the reality is that email is here to stay, sort of, because there's a lot of needs that email fulfills that these other tools, will, even in the future, will not. So for example, let's take a look at what emails, kind of a breakdown of what emails are in your organization. So we all know we've got lots of emails going around. A lot of them are things like just simple communications, like questions. Did anyone see the coffee pot on the third floor kitchen? Or what time is the meeting today? So and that is the vast bulk of emails. But there are also a select group of emails that are very important ones. So for example, if somebody sends a proposal to you or sends a contract or has an important status update that is sent, these are emails become documents of records. So while those emails may make up things like 5%, according to industry numbers, of the total volume of email, those emails represent about 80% of the important records in your organization. So a lot of focus goes to managing documents. In reality, the documents of records are often emails that need to be managed. And it's important to recognize that in order to be able to treat the emails like the documents that they truly are. And the problem, one of the problems is how do you identify what those 5% of emails are? So, as I said, there's contracts, proposals, client correspondence, reviews, all the things you see here. In different industries, you of course have industry-specific documents like building plans in construction, utilities, oil and gas, energy. You have things like deeds that have to be kept in government, and every industry has their own specific set of these. But one of the challenges is picking these out of the vast amount of emails that are present, and also being able to correctly classify them so that they can be found later on. So at this point, let's do a quick poll to see your experience with emails and what not managing them properly has, what the impact has been.
thank you for voting on giving us your answers so that we can get a sense of the people in the webinar, attending the webinar today. We'll show you the results in just a minute. Thank you. There you go.
Okay, so looking at the results, about 80% of, a little over 80% have said time has cost you, not managing lost emails have cost you time, and about evenly split, about 20% has cost money and loss of business, and almost 10% has had incurred penalties associated with that. So I think that's pretty much in line with what we've seen, what we see in the industry. So that's a good representation. So now that we know it's important to manage emails as documents, the question is what does exactly that mean? How do you manage them so that you can recover them and when you need them, so you don't lose the time, money, or business, or have to pay the penalties that we just talked about? So there's really two major steps that have to be taken regardless of whatever solution you pick. One of them is you have to capture the emails in some sort of system. So capturing them involves identifying which of the emails you need to keep. It also involves the mechanics of how do you grab those emails from wherever they are and either mark them or move them in such a way that they can be in a place that can be found later. And not less importantly is that you need to classify them. And this is one I think where people stumble a bit, and that is the idea that you need to be able to somehow categorize the emails in a way that makes them, either puts them in a place where they're grouped with like documents or like emails, but also attach to them some sort of description that makes it possible to later discover them. And that's the goal of email management, is at the end of the day, is that it's not only to retain and show that you've retained the emails, which of course is important, or disposed of them as the case may be, but in many cases it's also to discover them. So in case of things like audits, or in case of things where the organizations need to be able to find communications with clients to be able to, for litigation purposes or for service purposes. So capture and classify is a key element in order to be able to later discover the information. And we're going to look now, we'll look in a moment at some ways to do this, a couple of different options. But before we do that, let's get a feel for how you do this today. So we're going to ask a quick poll. How do your users in your company today manage important emails? Do you use personal mailboxes and PST files, shared mailboxes, public folders, maybe you store emails in SharePoint, or do you use a different document or email management system? So we'll give you a few minutes to vote. And okay, so I think the numbers are in. So about half of the folks on the webinar use personal mailboxes and PST files, and the other half is split between shared mailboxes at about a quarter of you, 17% for SharePoint, and then another 6 each for either public folders or different document management systems. So that gives us a good baseline understanding how we can talk about the different options that are available to you, and dive in a little bit deeper into the potential and possible solutions. So there's really two main types of solutions that we're going to examine today. One of them is to go out and buy a dedicated email or document management system. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons of those. And then my colleague Richard will join me in discussing the Microsoft-based options. You've invested heavily in Microsoft solutions, and there are a lot of there are several different options for you to manage emails as part of your overall email management, document management, or records management initiative. So we're going to look at those in a moment. The right solution for you is really the one that best fits your business needs, and we'll look at some recommendations at the end of the session. So the first option is a dedicated email management solution, or dedicated it could be part of a dedicated document management solution, but often these are products that are you go out and buy them. They're not part of what you already have with Microsoft. And let me just look at some of the pros and cons of these types of solutions. So these types of solutions, first of all, are typically fully featured. They have lots of bells and whistles, and they offer some things that you may not normally get from from some of the things you already have with Microsoft. So for example, if you have extremely large file sizes, this is a specific need that sometimes you need a dedicated system. These systems typically also provide some analytics that help you look at what you're doing with emails. They also offer some integration into your workflow. So oftentimes, make it, if you have a very specific workflow for people and to integrate into that, that's something that folks like to look at. On the other hand, kind of on the downside of these is that in most cases, it's more than you need. So a lot of these bells and whistles and some of the other things that you get with it is often more than you really need to install, and that means that training and implementation often become more of a challenge. Of course, support afterwards to be able to support all this stuff. To say nothing about the fact that you're also now introducing another vendor's infrastructure. So you need another supplier to maintain, another supplier you need to work with, and because you've already invested in the Microsoft tools, if there's a lot of overlap, sometimes this is unnecessary, both overhead, and of course, it also incurs additional expense. These solutions tend to be somewhat expensive. So there are a number of Microsoft-based solutions, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, David. So obviously, I think most of the people on this session today are using Microsoft tools to some degree, whether it's Exchange at the moment, or whether you're using SharePoint for document management or those kind of things. And also, not only the kind of traditional Microsoft platforms, but obviously everything moving towards the kind of cloud-based solutions in Office 365, which kind of introduce a few more options of where people could store documents and store emails with the likes of Teams and Groups and OneDrive, as well as SharePoint and Exchange and Outlook as well. So yeah, those are tools that you've probably already got in place today. You may be starting to use things like Teams and things as well. So yeah, what are the options available to you there in terms of what you could use to manage your emails? So the kind of default option, if you like, is emails staying in Exchange and documents being managed in SharePoint. Now, that in itself can be a challenge for some companies, moving to SharePoint for document management. But there's two different platforms here. Exchange is one platform and SharePoint is another. There's really no connection between the two. So in Office 365, the Microsoft Graph does actually give you some capabilities, and it's certainly a platform to kind of link the two together. And we're just showing you a screenshot of the kind of topics interface that Harmony brings that can utilize that graph to kind of present the information to you, even if the content, for example, emails are in Exchange and documents are in SharePoint. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on in more detail. But I think, the major pros and cons of this approach, let's take a look at the pros first. That obviously, there's not really much training from a mail management point of view, because it's Exchange, it's Outlook, it's what people have been using mostly for many years. I think the challenge with that is everybody manages their emails in a slightly different way. So, you may have lots of folders in your mailboxes, you may be using PST files and things, which isn't really the best way of managing emails, because, you've then got limitations on, mailbox sizes, if content's being put in PST files and it's potentially not being backed up, nobody else can access them, so it makes it difficult to find. Only the person who saved it and is managing it can actually find content. So it's quite a challenge. And also, attachments are buried within the email messages as well. So, if you've been sent maybe an important contract or a markup of a contract or something that wasn't saved outside of Exchange, then it's very difficult to retrieve that in the future, particularly if that person who received it no longer works for the company. So I think, a slightly different approach to that is managing emails not just in personal mailboxes, but in, let's say, group mailboxes or public folders, and potentially using the likes of Teams to manage documents. I think, again, that has a mixture of pros and cons to that approach as well. I think, some of them are still the same as what we saw in the first scenario, that really, emails are still basically in Exchange. They're not really visible to other members of the team. For example, there's when you create a team, for example, it creates a mailbox, but you can only access that mailbox from Outlook, and you can only access the documents from the Teams interface, either in the browser or in the kind of Teams application. But then that's 2 or 3 different interfaces for somebody to actually find content and retrieve it. And also, I think the concept of Teams can be quite challenging, because Teams can get quite overwhelming quite quickly. That anybody pretty much can create a team, and there's not too much control over that. And I think also by default, like the document libraries, for example, in a team don't really have metadata, and there's not an easy way to add metadata without going to SharePoint like accessing the underlying SharePoint platform. And likewise, emails don't have any additional metadata either. So it's very difficult to actually associate, an important email with an important document, where metadata can really bridge that gap and bring things together. And I think that brings us round to the third option here, which is using one single platform for both documents and emails. And that platform is SharePoint. And I think, some people on the poll earlier said that they are using SharePoint to manage their emails. And there's a lot of benefits to doing that. Having one single repository for all of the content, whether it's emails or documents, having a single interface to that information as well, being able to utilize different permissions and kind of metadata views, all those kind of things across both emails and documents, so that you can have different views of the content in the same place as well, brings a lot of big benefits. Now, I think the con there is that you actually need some way to get the content into and out of SharePoint. And out of the box, Outlook doesn't really have a rich interface to SharePoint, and likewise, SharePoint doesn't have a rich interface to Outlook. So what's required there is a tight integration, and that's where Harmony comes into it, because Harmony can give you access to your SharePoint libraries and Teams and OneDrive and things, all within your Outlook interface, so that you can capture and classify the content, like David mentioned earlier, but you can also find it and discover it for future reference, and bring that together. And again, we can utilize the graph to actually bring the information together of emails that are in your mailbox, but emails that are already saved into SharePoint, as we can see here. And we'll see that in a little bit more detail in a live environment. So let's just switch to my Outlook, and you'll see here that the Harmony integration in Outlook is a very rich sidebar that gives me access to not only SharePoint locations, but also my OneDrive and the teams that I'm a member of as well. So, for example, here I can utilize all the different platforms that I've got available to me in my Office 365 environment, for example. So if I drill down into a SharePoint site, I can see the libraries that I've got permission to access. Everything is security trimmed throughout the whole interface, so you will never see anything that you're not supposed to see. And as we go through, I think you'll see that you can discover content that you may not have seen, but you should do. But obviously, again, everything is permission based, so you won't see anything that you're not supposed to see. So here's an example of, let's say, a SharePoint library that I've configured that has some emails stored in it. And I think straight away, you know, it's quite familiar to people to have, for example, you know, the header information from those emails available to you, so you can sort and kind of filter by that information like you could do in your mailbox. And if I want to, you know, like capture an email, for example, I can simply drag and drop an email from anywhere in Outlook, whether it's in my mailbox, in a folder, in a PST file, for example. So this can really help people to kind of migrate from maybe a previous way of working to a new way of working with storing and managing emails in SharePoint. So if I drag an email in, you'll see that we can pick up all the important information about the email, you know, as I say, without the user having to fill that information in. So it's really nice and easy. I'm just displaying those properties just so that you can see what's actually happening in that process. But you'll see that the email, you know, has been marked in my Outlook as being saved to SharePoint. I can see it in SharePoint nice and easily. I can also preview that that email directly from here. So exactly as the email was received, I can see not only that email, but also other ones that I've captured or my colleagues have captured. So it could be, you know, other important emails that relate to the same kind of content, the same kind of information. Now, what I can also do is I can, you know, navigate around those SharePoint libraries nice and easily. So let's say I'm working in another library here where there's many more emails that have been captured. I can also utilize things like Outlook rules to automatically capture emails that meet certain criteria and get those into SharePoint nice and easily. But also, once I've got that content in there, as I say, I can search on the content just by clicking in the top of the sidebar. I can add different search scopes so that I just search for particular types of content and things. But also, I can actually filter the views that I'm seeing here. So Harmony is able to pick up, you know, multiple views as defined in your SharePoint libraries, which could display certain types of metadata and certain types of content. So for example, here I'm displaying just the email content in this library, and I'm organizing it by, for example, you know, the email type columns there. But also I might want to filter that down. So I'm just interested, let's say, in emails that were received in the last 3 months, for example. And then I can capture that and save that as a SharePoint view to say these might be recent emails. So it's very, very easy then to utilize SharePoint and the benefits of SharePoint with all the permissions and the metadata and the views directly from here. I've also got some other views there that might be grouped by different information. So for example, here I can see like an email conversation that has taken place, grouped by the original subject or the conversation ID. So actually utilizing Exchange functionality within a SharePoint environment and presenting it to you in a kind of in your Outlook, which means that you can really, really manage those emails effectively and work on them. Now, what we can also do is say, actually, I'm maybe reading an email that I've just received. It relates to a particular client. Now, it might be that I don't know where I need to save that or if I need to save it. So what Harmony can do is actually analyze the email and use machine learning to identify what we call topics from that email. So in this case, it relates to a particular case, maybe, and we can see that there, and also a particular client. So those two topics have been automatically identified by Harmony, and I can then use those topics to say, okay, has this email been saved? Do I need to save it? And where should I save it? So if I just click on the topic there, you'll see that I've got a number of different types of views of information that I want to see. So in one view, I can see other emails that have been identified with the same topic, both in my mailbox, so in Exchange, but also in SharePoint. So in one single interface, I can see I've got a cross-platform kind of view on related content. So it might be, for example, if I want to select an email that hasn't yet been saved, I can open that up. That will open up into Outlook. I can see it hasn't yet been saved, and I can also suggest locations of where I might want to save that based on those topics that have been identified, but also the recent locations that I've been using, not only in Harmony, but also across my Office 365 environment. So it could be places in my OneDrive or Teams or Groups or SharePoint libraries that I've been working in. So I could go ahead and save that content, but also I can see other emails, excuse me, that have been saved to SharePoint already. So if I open up one of those, you'll see it opens exactly as it did from Outlook, opens it back up, and I can see, for example, that this email has already been saved. I can see where it's been saved, and I can navigate directly to that library as well. So I can see, you know, other content that relates to that particular case in this instance, or that particular client. And above that, not only based on the location, but if we just go back to our topics interface there and select the kind of combined view of not only emails, but also documents, I can see that there's a document that's been shared with one of the teams that I'm a member of, where this particular client has been mentioned. But also I can see some content in SharePoint libraries where this particular topic has been identified as well. So Harmony gives me an easy way to bring together all of the content that I'm working on, not only emails, but also documents as well. And you know, this is obviously just a taster of what Harmony can do in a short demonstration. So with that, I think we'll move on to some of the other topics that we wanted to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Richard, for a great demo. One of the questions that people often ask recently is about Office 365 labels. How do the labels fit into the overall picture of email management, and how does that relate to the kind of things that Richard was showing? So just a couple of things very briefly, I'll describe a few things about labels. If you're interested in a more detailed explanation, I recently published a full-length article in CMS Wire talking about how these work and what you need to know about them. So labels, there's actually two types of labels. There's retention and sensitivity. So what Microsoft has offered is a way to define retention policies and how long you need to keep a document, what happens when that period expires, and then also for content, whether it's emails or documents for either of these labels, the sensitivity is who has access to it, what is the level of sensitivity assigned to this particular type of content. So it is really a kind of unique type of metadata. And some people say, well, maybe this is enough for email management. And I think the point is that let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of labels. So labels are retention labels or policies. It can be assigned to either documents and emails, so you can have consistent policies for those across them. And it's very useful if you want to define retention policies, which is an important part of every records management initiative today, not only keeping things, but also making sure that you don't keep what you don't need. So being able to automatically delete or dispose of content. However, what labels are not is that they're not a form of classification or categorization by content. So you can assign, or you can even automatically assign labels to documents or emails, but they do not describe what that is. So you can say that an email may need to be disposed of in 6 months, but it doesn't give you any indication of what is in that email. You may be able to say that it's top secret, but it doesn't give you, again, any indication of what inside that email is what it's talking about. So emails and documents also in this case are stored in separate repositories. So while you do have consistent policies, they are physically located in different places. And these need to be applied to content separately. So in Exchange, they need to be applied to emails. In documents, they can be applied in OneDrive, SharePoint, etc. So there are a couple of technical things you just need to be aware of. So for example, if you create automatic policies, these take time to be applied. These also setting policies or defining policies require a high level of E5 licensing from Microsoft. But the main takeaway for this is that while these are extremely useful for helping you retain and dispose content, what they don't do is they don't help you categorize or classify the information based on the content or the case or the customer or any other parameter that you would use to classify that information. So before we look at some recommendations on what tools would be the best fit for you, we'll just maybe do one last poll and ask, are you planning to use any of the following Microsoft capabilities in your organization? Have a bit of a description, we can understand maybe where to take some of this afterwards. Teams, labels, group mailboxes, or none of the above. So we know, of course, that Teams is an extremely popular product from Microsoft. It has become the fastest growing product ever, according to Microsoft's recent announcements. So we know that there's a big uptake of that. So it's not surprising that we see a vast majority of the folks here saying that they're going to be either planning to use it or using it already. So we see 82% using it. Labels, we see about a third of folks planning to use labels, and slightly more than that. Group mailboxes, about 11%, none of the above. So I think that tracks pretty consistently with what we see in the market, in our own experience, in terms of the uptake for these types of technologies. So maybe based on that, with some quick recommendations that we can make. I think one of the things to ask about, what is the right solution, whether you go with a dedicated solution or whether you go with a Microsoft-based solution for email management, is do you need to find the emails and documents later on? So we do, of course, have situations where people say, all I need to do is to be able to prove that I've stored this information. I never need to find it later on, in which case, your solution, your options are quite simple. If you use labels and keep the emails in Exchange and documents in SharePoint or OneDrive, you can pretty much be compliant. You can set retention policies to automatically delete content or trigger an event that requires a review of deleting content, and that's pretty straightforward. However, if you need to be able to find the information later, for example, for purposes of serving clients, people ask questions in the past you need to go back and find out what other people have answered that client. If you're doing giving advice to clients and you need to look at history of that. If you, for example, are in a manufacturing business and you need to find information from suppliers for business purposes, if you're in a regulated industry or you've been audited or any of these purposes for litigation, there's many needs that you need to find this information. If you do need that, then of course the element of classification is critical. So being able to use either metadata or, as we showed, also being able to use auto-generated topics is super critical for being able to find this information. Keeping the information in a single repository is helpful in order to be able to find everything in one place. Although now with Harmony Topics, keeping emails in Exchange and documents in OneDrive or SharePoint, we are able to now see everything as long as it's classified accurately, which we do with topics automatically. We can bring everything into a single screen and let you be able to see that. So it's very important for email or document or records management. The second recommendation, I think, it is kind of a generic recommendation that's important in any case, and that is for whatever email management initiative you're involved with, or records management, or document management, or case management, it's really important to keep the user experience needs in focus. Oftentimes with these types of projects, we see that organizations invest a tremendous amount in defining the policies, in defining who has access to information, defining how long things need to be retained, but they spend less effort in figuring out or defining how the end users will actually comply. So how they will capture the information, how they'll actually accurately classify the information. And without taking this, what we call the last mile of the initiative into account, you could set up the best policies, but your results will certainly fall short of expectations because you don't make it easy for people to do the right thing. And therefore, with all these policies in place, you're still not going to be able to capture and classify that information and therefore not be able to discover it later on. So with that, I thank you for your time. And we have one final poll question, and I'll turn it back over to Susan.
Hi. So let us know if you're interested in being contacted by one of our representatives, if you are an existing customer, or if you'd like to trial Harmony, or if you just have some questions, or maybe you got all your questions answered today. And while you're answering those questions, let's take a look at the questions you have been asking while David and Richard have been speaking. Let's start with, is this possible in Exchange or also in shared mailboxes? That is the identification of topics, machine learning possibilities. Richard, can you speak to that? Richard?
Yeah, sorry, my phone was on mute. My headset was on mute.
Mute, got it.
Yeah, so I mean, Harmony allows you to open up, obviously in Outlook you can open up multiple mailboxes, and they could be shared mailboxes, personal mailboxes, etc. And so you can obviously capture content from any of those in Harmony within your Outlook. And the topics engine is basically enabled for, you enable it for certain mailboxes and certain users and things. So it could be used across different mailboxes. Yeah.
Thank you. Is it possible to save email that's in an Office group mailbox to SharePoint and make that a default to save emails from the group mailbox to a team site?
Yeah, and it is similar kind of fashion to what we were just discussing. Yes, you could connect to a group mailbox in Outlook, save those emails to a team in the sidebar in Harmony, and you could also create rules within your Outlook that carry that out for you, so that anything that gets received into that group mailbox gets automatically put into the corresponding team library, if you like.
Richard, next question is, can you create an item in a SharePoint list through the Harmony interface?
Yes, you can, absolutely. So in Harmony, you can connect to lists as well as libraries. By default, we support custom lists, announcements, task lists, contact lists, those kind of things. And you can go into those and obviously work on the items that are already there, or you can add new items from that interface as well. And you can also add specific custom lists that you want to see in Harmony, or you can hide those if you're not using them. So yeah, absolutely. We support views and items in those lists. So very similar functionality to what we do with the document libraries, but obviously specific stuff for the type of list that you're actually working in, and even giving you the ability to attach documents and emails to a list item by dragging those on to the item that you want to save them against as well.
Thank you. Does Harmony work both with the desktop and online version of Outlook?
Yeah, so we have obviously the version of Harmony that we were showing you today and talking about mainly is a client-side integration to the thick client of Outlook, but we do have an Office app that is available for all versions of Outlook, including Outlook on in a browser and Outlook on a mobile device as well. So even Outlook for iOS, Outlook for Android, which gives you capabilities to capture content, both emails and attachments, and map header information, like you saw when we dragged and dropped emails from the thick client, but also so that you can share content as well. So you can add in attachments or links into your emails as well from SharePoint.
Great. There are a couple more questions. I understand you can drag files from Harmony into an email to send. How do you define the domain for it to be sent as a link as opposed to being sent as an attachment?
So there is an option when you're sending something as an attachment. There is an option in Harmony to actually prompt the user to say, are you sure you want to send that as an attachment? And actually kind of take them through the process of replacing it with a link instead. And we do have options if you go into the Harmony options under the kind of mail options to say when you should be prompted for that. And you can set specific domains so that, for example, I only want to get prompted when I'm sending kind of document, attachments internally because I actually want to use SharePoint instead, or I want my users to use SharePoint. But maybe when you're sending something externally to not do that. So there's definitely options around doing that. And also when you drag in a document from the sidebar in Harmony, you can either add it as an attachment or as a link, and the default operation out of the box is to add a link. You can always hold the Alt key when you drag and drop to add the document as an attachment instead. And you can also change the default operation there as well. So if you want the default to be an attachment, then you can set that in the options. And all of the options there can be configured via the likes of registry keys to kind of set the defaults for all users or particular groups of users, and also to even lock those down so that users can't change those options as well.
Thank you. There are more questions, but I think I'm just going to go with two more so that we can maybe get 10 minutes on the hour. Do you support document libraries with custom columns like managed metadata?
Yes, absolutely. So whatever metadata is configured in the SharePoint library, it comes through into Harmony. So we're using standard web services of SharePoint to retrieve information and write information to and from SharePoint. So if there's managed metadata or enterprise keywords, drop-down lists, all those kind of things that are fully supported by Harmony.
Great. And here, can you hold on? Can we save emails to specific channels with Teams or just into a general shared documents?
It picks up the default library for the team that you've created. Now, obviously, when you create additional channels in a team, it actually creates a folder within that library. So you would see those in Harmony. If you select the team, you'll then see the folders within that particular library, one for each channel, named accordingly, obviously. But if there's additional libraries that you've added in, you can always add a connection to that particular library just by copying and pasting the link to that library into the Harmony sidebar as well.
Great, thank you, Richard. Let's give everybody a couple minutes on the hour here. David, Richard, thank you both for a wonderful presentation. Thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view the recorded webinar again within a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.